everyone, and welcome to part 2 of House of X 2, issue number 2. As we are chugging along with various lives of Moira X throughout the time, and everything, all the bombshell reveal that happened. If you want to see the first part, the link for that is down below, so you can go and check that out. So let's keep on rolling, because last one we ended 1 through something. So we're at life number 7. So let's go. Let's go with life number 7.
So we're going to just keep going around the clock here. So life 1 through 3 is kind of like Moira discovering maybe what it means to be mutant, what her attitudes towards being a mutant is going to be. Life number 3 kind of sends her on the path of, I've got to get more directly involved. So then, lives 3 through 6 is her being directly involved. Now she's been radicalized yet again, similar to how she was radicalized by Mystique and Destiny to go hard at the mutant rights and assisting mutants. Now she's been radicalized to take a slightly more proactive approach. And life number 7, we get Moira the Assassin. Tyler, actually, let's start with Faria, and then we'll go down to Tyler. Faria, what did you think about Assassinista Moira?
Wait, me or Faria?
I thought.
Yeah, let's start with
I think
Faria.
it's his go.
Since she's the new X-Men reader, I'd like to hear her reaction first.
I think this was mostly. I'm like, okay. This is where it's a different between the Moira we know all this time versus this is just new Moira, Moira we're following. And it kind of makes sense that when first all these lives, she was trying to stop this Sentinel thing. And this is the life she decided to do. I'm going to do the most drastic thing I know. I'm going to stop the making of Sentinel by taking out all the people who made the Sentinel, which is the Trask family, right? Family or related or whatever. So I was like, whoa. To me, it was like, that's a very much moving on a dime. And to Peter's point, where did she learn how to, be an assassin? So again, I guess this life was just dedicated to that path. And I don't remember whether does she meet up with Professor X over here as well, or she just kind of goes into the military training directly. She disappears. She's not even involved in the lives of mutants and X-Men and just goes directly into the killing, because she just becomes like a hidden angel sort of thing. Kind of I'm not even going to connect to anyone. This is what I'm going to do.
Right. According to the timeline, this is the one where she doesn't even go to Oxford at all. She goes straight into the British Armed Forces, learns how to be a super assassin, and then goes on her killing spree of the Trasks.
Right. This is when I was also reminded that she's supposed to be English. I forgot about that she's actually English.
Scottish.
Oh, Scottish. Sorry. She's not American is the word. And this is when I was reminded. Oh, yeah, that's right. Yeah, she's that. But yeah, so I was like, okay, this is kind of and I don't know there's a whole thing where the Moira disappears. Don't know what that means. You guys can enlighten me. So Zach, why don't you go next?
Well, we don't know why Moira disappears, I don't think. I'm presumably laying her plot for the string of murders that she's going to commit. But, the other big takeaway here is her realization that not only the Sentinels, but artificial intelligence as a concept is going to happen regardless of what action she takes. So in the string of things that Moira is learning are historical inevitabilities, which we have seen gradually emerge over the course of these lives. We now know that not only are some form of the X-Men seemingly going to happen, which is to say mutants ascending, not only are humans going to ascend, because humans have already ascended, but now that we also know that eventually machines are going to ascend. We have all 3 factions of the coming war that we saw in Powers of 10 now established as historical inevitabilities no matter what anybody does in these lifetimes.
Right, and that's also...
Sorry.
Go for it. No, go.
No, I actually didn't think about that. The ascension of the machines as the third leg of the entire war. The only thing I thought about this when I read her life is Sarah Connors.
It's absolutely true.
It is, right?
This is the one where Moira comes in all ripped with her gun. And
hey, good news for her. There will in fact be more than one killer robot that travels back through time. So she will have ample opportunity to deal with that. In fact, we saw one of those killer robots back in Powers of 10 #1.
So here's the question. Her life ends. She dies after discovering Wild Master Mold's facility. Did she die of shock? Like, why did she die? Like, what's the implication of that?
I think the implication of that is that Master Mold or his Sentinels killed her.
Because it's not like it should be Moira is killed.
Yeah, you see the shadow over her head.
Yeah, that's true. Yes. Okay.
Did you, all three of you actually, because Freya has read this, is the Wild Master Mold facility meant to be what we see at the beginning of Grant Morrison's New X-Men? It lines up in terms of years on the timeline.
That could very well be the case.
Isn't that what they call that? Yeah.
Because Moira is not in New X-Men, right? I don't remember.
No, she's
her.
dead. She died just before that. She came 5 issues.
In fact, just as a little side note, in Grant Morrison's original pitch, his manifesto, which is found in some collected editions of New X-Men, he actually intends to use Moira very prominently in that run. And the editor writes as a note on his pitch, "Can't use her, she's dead." He didn't know, he hadn't read the issues, but yes, he had wanted to use her and he couldn't.
Yeah.
I think that was more of like his Scottish, like, I'm Scottish, so I'm going to use my other Scottish character. But the thing is, so does that mean this is New X-Men timeline? Because I feel like New X-Men often feels like separated out from everything else. I don't know. It feels like
New X-Men is very much the 616 universe. That's our timeline.
Well, I'll pay off a Chekhov's gun here that I promised I would earlier. Let's talk about in 7 this idea that Tyler originally brought up about the whole metatextual aspect. I think he did. I don't know. Everybody's in different places now. And how like each version of the writing kind of addresses the way we're progressing through X-Men as a franchise. This is the edgy, leather-clad, gun-toting X-Men version of X-Men, right? Like we're gradually moving. Was Freya? Yeah. We're gradually moving from this very idyllic version of X-Men that could be described as more Silver Age through the kind of grim mutant massacre version of X-Men. Now we're at their re-envisioning X-Men. She's an assassin, Not
only that, she's kind of dressed like the characters in the Kyle Yost or the Rick Remender versions of X-Force. This is X-Force Moira.
Ooh, okay.
And so I think that its ends justify the means more. We've never seen more, engaging in murder before. It felt to me, especially because it ends in the Master Mold facility, which I think is a reference to New X-Men, that it's like gonna happen anyway. Even she killed all these people. She's like, that genocide won't occur, and it still occurs. Yeah. But I also think it's like a nod that because Hickman is that clever to the way we've progressed.
The one thing I was gonna say before we move to the thing, I really want a 5-issue miniseries of this life of Moira. Like I am just like,
love it.
Like I was just like, I want it. I really love murdering ladies. So like, please,
as long as Greg Rucka writes it. Tyler, did you have anything else you wanted to throw in on this one?
Not specifically to this one, but Hickman actually tweeted that in the map there is a typo. And that has to do with what we just discussed, the New X-Men and her dying. So it's reversed. It should be reversed.
And that was freaking everybody out when they first saw the timeline. Like, oh, is this a clue that Life 10 is not the 616 universe? Yes, it probably is. Mm-hmm. And in any case, those events do occur in the order that we know they occurred from past X-Men comics.
Yeah.
We will be quite explicit when we get to Life 10 and pointing out that Moira dies before New X-Men starts, as we have established.
Yeah.
That is how it happens. Yes.
All right. So shall we move to the next one? Life 8.
No further comments. Last call. Going once, going twice. Okay. Life number 8. So Moira has tried the Xavier path. She's tried the assassin path. She thinks, what's the next most morally gray thing I could possibly do? Let's go hang out with Magneto. And it seems
not just Magneto, but Magneto on Cthulhu Island. Magneto in the greatest of all of his layers.
Yes! So this is Magneto just before X-Men 150 when he sinks the Leningrad submarine. Important because this becomes a prevailing plot point about Magneto's relative guilt and culpability that leads to some conflict with Magneto, Xavier, and Moira, which we'll see in Timeline 10. So Freya, you love a good anti-hero sometimes. What did you think about anti-hero Moira joining up with Magneto?
So this is when I'm like, this girl is doing everything as an engineer's dream, because it's seriously, because so I work in a production facility and so many things always go wrong, and it's pretty much like, okay, let's try this. We start with the reset. That's always the first thing. You reset. And then you do like, okay, this is the easiest options. Let's try this. And then you go radical. Like, and this is, to me, is like, okay, try taking it all apart, which is the killing all the task. And then, but that didn't work. So now I'm going to call in external forces to do this. And this is that level that she have reached. And I'm like, girl, you're doing everything right. That's where I was kind of going with this. And one thing, this is kind of like, I'm jumping ahead and talking about life number 9, is like, she went with Magneto first, and then she went with Apocalypse, because, Apocalypse is kind of like million times a little bit out there. So it's like, oh, let's try with Magneto first. Which kind of brings us, like, I am asking the question is like, did she meet Magneto before this? That's what I was trying to look for. Like, before that life, she never had any connection to Magneto, correct?
Tyler and Zach, what do you think about that?
Well, we're not told of any explicit connection to Magneto in the other lives, but I mean, we know that they would have had overlap based on the 616 universe. Right.
Yeah. I'm just kind of like, to me, I just love the idea of variable change. Like, this is like, this is like kind of adding an external for, like, Xavier didn't work, killing the Sentinel Maker didn't work. So now I'm going to go with Magneto, the least of.
Well, I kind of want to zoom in on what you brought up, that it's going to, as you mentioned, this life is going to be followed by a life in which she allies herself with another traditional X-Men villain, Apocalypse. So let's try to distinguish what Hickman sees here as the difference between the two and what variable Moira is trying to test. And the narration tells us at the beginning of this life that Magneto represents necessary evil. If Xavier is the good, if pursuing the dream is pursuing a force of good, this is a force not just of evil, but of necessary evil, an evil that apparently has to be there in whatever kind of moral evolutionary schema is being set up, whatever that means and however we're supposed to interpret it.
Well, so I mean, go for it. Sorry. Go.
No, I mean, it's Claremont has always sort of established that Magneto and Professor X are different sides of the same coin, right? So I think that sort of like, fits into the narration here. And basically she's like, oh, I was with Professor X in life 4. That didn't work out well. So what if I go to life, go align with Magneto first and see what happens? So right. I think it's her testing that hypothesis.
Right. And that's what I was saying, like changing the, doing what a good engineer should do. change the variable, try out a new hypothesis, and that's what she's doing.
And
one of the things.
Sorry, just want to make one other point. It's like, strictly in this lifetime, she may not have known Magneto, but I think in lifetime 4, she would have known him. So that is,
has to.
Yeah. So that's where
has to, because. Yeah, because Magneto and Xavier are like this. Like, you can't, like, yin and yang, I guess, to say. Yeah. So that's how she probably know of him, to use that in one of the variables in later life. Yeah. So one thing like that kind of popped up to me, because this is one of my favorite events. I hate events, but this is one of my favorite, House of M. Like, so it mentions over here that Moira establishes House of M. What is the implication of that, you think? Like, what does that mean? So this is not the House of M that we have seen? Like, what is this?
Well, it's apparently a different House of M. Now, if we imagine that Life 10 is, in fact, what we've been seeing play out in the current events and the future events of all of the other issues we've been reading, then it would seem to imply that she took this experience and carried it over to one of these future lives that she's going to have. So she's going to overlay that House of M that she develops here with a House of X that we see she develops in Life 10. That's one way, and maybe the most obvious way to read
Well, the way I think about this is also, I mean, nothing to do with House of M specifically, but I like how most of the other superheroes doesn't play a role until now.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
this is very important, I believe.
Right.
Well, I have a question to pose here. Do you think there's any significance to the fact that that this is the Magneto on Cthulhu Island? That's the base and the time period that Hickman and Moira are choosing here. Is it just cool set dressing? Is it just Hickman remembering a Magneto base that looked really awesome? Or do we think that there's a deeper reason for him choosing this moment in both of their lives?
Well, I think we have to be careful not to get too hung up on it, because looking at the timeline, it happens in year 24, and I want to pause there and talk about a couple things. So in Lifetime 5, she decided she's going to get a really early jump on going to Xavier. She did it when she was 13 years old. In this lifetime, she does not do that. She kind of like rejects Xavier at year 17, when other times she's joined up with him, and then there's a gap. So she gives herself more time to prepare. What, we don't know. And then she joins up with Magneto in year 24. Year 24 is still relatively early in terms of the X-Men's history. It's before she gets married in the timeline that we think that we know. So this might even be Magneto like before X-Men 1. It's almost certainly Magneto. In fact, it has to be Magneto before X-Men #1. So I think that we're not meant to actually think that it's Magneto right before Uncanny X-Men 150. I think we're meant to believe that he had this base in his pocket all along. But that B, I think Hickman is trying to evoke that Imperial phase of Magneto, whether or not the years line up.
Well, and in the X-Men team he faces off with after he rages and tries to strike with those warheads against the Capitol building is definitely the all-new, all-different team. So we're not looking at like the events of X-Men #1 here.
No, but I'm saying she joins up with him relatively early in the timeline. And there's, in a way, this is one of the most oblique timelines, because it's like, by the way, Magneto conquers America. Like, there's a lot of stuff in the timeline that occurs. And I think that in terms of establishing House of M, to go back to your comment, like, that's what the House of M reality is. It was Magneto as the regent of America. And so it's the House of Magnus, the House of Magneto, and the House of Moira as a House of Kings, which is really interesting how, like, Hickman is kind of like pre-setting up a retcon to influence why House of M, the comic book, wound up how it is. But I'll also point out, and then I'll turn it back over to the other three of you, this is the earliest that Moira ever dies. What does that say about the futility of Magneto's way of doing things? I mean, she dies significantly earlier here than she does at any other time.
Yeah, she did.
Oh, I mean, only 38.
Yeah, bring back the point about why she chose this period. I can't remember exactly which issue, but there was one particular issue, is it 150, where he nearly kills Kitty.
That's 150, yeah.
That's 150, right? So there is definitely a switch in characters for Magneto from that point onwards. He became a softer Magneto. So there's a reason why she chose that time period. So it has to happen before he became softer.
Oh yeah, it's long before, but I think that's a good point, that a lot of the ways that we think about Magneto as modern readers having been through the whole Claremont era, that Moira effectively circumvents. Like, he probably never gets made a baby in this one, which she's responsible for, because
she's not actually responsible for him becoming a baby. That like weird mutant thing from the Defenders is responsible for him becoming a baby. She is responsible for tampering with his genetics once he was a baby. Such that she was trying to prevent him from becoming evil again.
But sorry, please finish. I'm just so excited.
No, I think it's a real open question whether that happens in any of these lifetimes other than our own, because that's a weird thing to have occurred.
And I think this is where we have to come back to Tyler's comment from the very beginning of Life 1, that Hickman is building this, so he could have cross-cut. We've seen him do much trickier things in comic books. He's doing it sequentially because it's like he's laying bricks in a wall that he's building up to show you this supports decisions here, this supports decisions here. Maybe the reason that Moira tampers with his code is because she saw that this Magneto, who she tried to take all the way to helping mutants survive, was incapable of it because of how evil he is, and she doesn't understand how to soften him. But who knows what happened in Life 4. But I think that to the point of like, she's been a killer. Now we know how she knows how to handle a machine gun because she's been in the freaking army from Life number 7. And here's how she gets so intrinsically tied up with Magneto in the way that we have seen her be in X-Men history that we know. And it's Hickman just deliberately preempting these questions about what about, because he's giving us prior lives. She decided these are the key components of potential success.
Yep.
Right. And to me, the biggest takeaway was like, what Tyler said, the first time we see other X-Men, non-X-Men Marvel character make appearances. And then I had a Fariha moment where I'm like, House of X and House of M. So I had that moment. I finally made the connection. Guys, it's been announced all these years. All this time, I did not make the connection of House of M and House of X. It was only here.
I haven't either. I mean, I never once thought about House of M. To me, House of M is just what Magneto calls being in charge, because he doesn't want to say the M-Men because it's really hard to say. So it's the House of M. But I didn't ever put that together.
Yeah, I was thinking, I'm like, oh yeah, that event, and this is another event. Yeah, so that's all my contribution.
I mean, maybe it's because of my read-through project, and it hasn't been that long since I read House of M, but I thought of that pretty quickly after I saw the title of Hickman's series.
Yeah, and it was disappointing because that's one of my favorite events. Like, I really like that event. So I was like, oh damn. So
on the map of Krakow, right? They also call Magneto's House of M.
That's right. Yeah, his tower, which we will later see as the base of Nimrod the Lesser and the library of Nimrod the Greater, is the House of M.
Yeah.
So I could be hallucinating right now, but I swear, I swear that we saw Carol Danvers as Miss Marvel in this issue. But now I'm second guessing myself because she's not in that.
That is going to be in the next life that we actually see her.
Thank you. Right. She's amongst the dead. Okay, because I have some things to say about that too. All right. So we're done. Last call on Life number 8.
Go for it.
Let's move on to Life number 9. And oh boy, is this one juicy. Moira is like, well, we've done Xavier, we've done Magneto. Let's go basically awaken Apocalypse before he's due to pop out of his crypt and say like, it's time to get an early start on the survival of the fittest, because if you don't, it's never going to work. And there is a lot to dig into in this one. Freya, do you have any experience with Apocalypse as a character other than in the movie?
No, I saw that movie. I'm sad to say. To say that I saw that movie.
I think movie Apocalypse is actually pretty consistent to comic book Apocalypse. So what do you think? I mean, would you have ever anticipated, other than by the hint on the cover, that Moira was going to team up with Apocalypse?
No, I mean, but to me, it's like, it's a perfect progression. Like, if the necessary evil didn't work, go with the evil. And my thing that I was trying to frantically find out over it was, did Moira become one of the Force Horsemen? Right? So she did become one of them.
She appears to be more than a horseman. She appears to be something like a counterpart or a consort.
Yeah.
Interesting.
I want to be careful with the word consort, because
let's not.
Yeah.
Well, only because Xavier was called Lalange's consort, but I just want.
I mean, it's a neutral term, but I assume that there's
the reason I want to be careful is because I think it's very specific that she has no romantic link to Magneto, and normally I'd be like, oh, Hickman tying romance, really, because we've seen him on the future covers more kissing Apocalypse, but Apocalypse has never been depicted as somebody who really cares about love or romance, unless it has to do with
the event that we just saw,
except for in the last 6 months. So I actually think it's really really interesting that there's the implication. I mean, they're holding hands at one point.
Yeah, because I'm going to stand by Consort, because look at that splash page. The two of them holding hands with, if not necessarily affection, certainly some indication of very close partnership. This looks like the way you would pose if you are two monarchs who are consorts.
But I guess the reason I say be careful is like not because I think there's anything wrong with the word, but because this is Moira's doing. We've never seen Apocalypse do, like, it's her manipulation of him, quite possibly, because we've never seen any indication that he has an inclination in this direction.
Oh,
so
I don't argue with that at all.
Like,
I mean, this is we're told.
Consort.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
We're told at the beginning of this is Moira embracing the idea of evolutionary dominance, which, if I could say one more thing here, I've got to call a little bit of BS on Moira, because it sounds like actually everything she's done through all of these lives has been embracing the notion of evolutionary dominance. We heard her espouse earlier on in these lives, starting with life number 4, the quote that actually got used for one of the publicity campaigns here, that when two different species share the same environment, they have to adapt or die. We heard
That's very Apocalypse.
Right, and we heard Destiny say the same thing, that she had to change or die. We've heard Moira over and over again in every single life embracing the ethos of Darwinian evolutionary theory. So this is not the first time that she's doing this. She might think it's the first time that she's doing this. It's certainly the most militant time she's doing it, but it's not the first time.
So that kind of brings a question why she didn't go to Apocalypse before.
Tyler, we haven't heard from you too much on life number 9 yet, and you know Apocalypse's long history. What did you make of this?
I think she did not go to him because she thinks that he's evil. So so she left it as a last resort. Like, she knows that her life is going to end. Okay, she thinks that her life is going to end in
right. This is number 9. Yeah.
So this is number 9. You know, I need to pick a really, really drastic action. So while I don't believe that, you know, that is the right one, but she's kind of like desperate, so she went for it. And, you know, I mean, it's also interesting that off panel that she wakes up Apocalypse. Apocalypse first kills Xavier, then he kills Magneto.
Because it's variables. She's never... Because does Magneto kill Xavier in their timeline?
No, I don't think so.
So is this her only chance to do the experiment without Xavier? She thinks Apocalypse is the only one that can take him out?
Yeah, it could be.
Or they were just both found unfit to survive in the ruthless evolutionary theory of Apocalypse. I mean, this is... The premise of this alliance with Apocalypse is not to do evil and destroy everybody else. It's simply to test in the most ruthless way possible who is fit to survive.
So, and it also kind of brings a point that maybe they tried to recruit Magneto. Like, they, you know, like that's why Xavier was... Yeah, and then, you know, to get Magneto didn't play ball. It's like, okay, you gotta go. But one thing, I was actually just looking at it over there. Moira and Apocalypse rescue the first Horseman and return to Earth.
Yeah, they do.
What does that mean?
What does it mean, Peter?
What does it mean, Tyler?
No, you said it. You're the most excited one.
Yeah, someone please tells me what that means.
Well, this is relatively early in the timeline. I know that because people have seen Vulcan on the covers, you might jump to think Vulcan, but he doesn't seem like he's born yet because Cyclops is supposed to be a maximum of 28 years old. I'll trust you to do the math. So you have to wonder, Apocalypse doesn't always use mutants as horsemen. He just wants people that are the fittest to survive. Moira knows everything she could possibly know from life 4, 5, and 8 about the cosmic gallery of Marvel characters. If you could go to space and bring one character that was still in space as of the early Silver Age, possibly before the Silver Age, who would you bring back? And you can't pick Silver Surfer because he's already Galactus' herald. And you don't want Thanos because he's going to pop off and do his own crazy crap. Who do you bring back?
Well, you've got him in silhouette right on the next page, don't you?
Who?
I'm going to, you know, I don't know this for a fact, But that certainly looks like Firelord on that page, doesn't it? The flaming head, the flaming stick. We're looking at a Herald of Galactus there in silhouette.
So you think, because and Firelord, of course, does appear in what, like Uncanny X-Men 106 when he comes to fight Jean?
When he fights Jean as Phoenix, yeah. Well,
So
I guess not actually Jean as Phoenix. I guess the Phoenix Force.
Yeah. Whoa, Zach's throwing down hard. Tyler, did you think it was Firelord? Who would you?
Yeah,
or
I thought
to make
it
it
was
more.
Firelord.
Oh my gosh, I didn't even notice it. So Freya, you maybe didn't think it was Firelord. Who would you bring from space? It's got to be somebody who's maybe still in space, like in the Silver Age. Who would you pick?
Well, I don't know anything about Silver Age. Can't stand those comics. But what I was saying that, what I was thinking Vulcan. Like, because that's the only one I've recently read. But to me, the only reason that didn't jive, because Vulcan is always ultra crazy, and I don't think Apocalypse will like him. That's why I'm like, oh, maybe not. But yeah, so that's why I'm like, what is this? So I thought that there was actually a history, some kind of X-Men event that had that, and maybe that's what it's referring to. But I'm understanding that's not.
Well, I think Firelord makes sense. I think we can also take a look at the way that Ed Piskor has summarized Silver Age and early Claremont X-Men in Grand Design, and he kind of links up all the space stuff. And it could be that Moira's telling Apocalypse to go to space to preempt one of those interfering space people and make them and deal with them, and then they come back with Firelord. I was also just making a list in my head of who would I want, right? If I was Apocalypse and I got to go to space that early, because usually he's asleep. I would either want Gladiator, because I love Gladiator and he's pretty much Superman, or I would want Super Skrull. So I was just trying to think of who would you pick if you had all of space, but it might very well be Firelord. I mean,
well, that's certainly a character who in the Marvel Universe is usually portrayed as being on the same power level. And I mean, the reason that Claremont had him fight Phoenix was to prove that Phoenix was of the top tier power level in the Marvel Universe.
Right, because didn't he originally want to have her fight Thor? And
it was
well, we'll use Firelord.
Exactly. So it had to be the transitive property, because Firelord had fought Thor to a draw. So if Phoenix fights Firelord to a draw, therefore Phoenix could fight Thor to a draw.
So the question is that is Apocalypse always picks mutant as his horseman or horsewoman, or he doesn't care? It's just anyone who's
he's picked non-mutants. Sometimes he gives them powers, but he has picked non-mutants.
Anybody who has shown a fitness to survive is potentially worthy to serve Apocalypse.
So my other thing, when I actually first saw that, especially with the glowing head, Ghost Rider came to mind as well.
That would be awesome.
Do we know that it's not?
Well, we know that it's not Ghost Rider from the first Powers of 10 issue, because a lot of people saw those people on Asteroid K and said, "Oh, Ghost Rider's with the future X-Men." Ghost Rider's apparently not with the future X-Men. So we can probably rule out Ghost Rider.
Okay. So now you got me really looking at those silhouettes, because there's somebody with a big headdress, almost like an Ankh or something.
Yeah, I was looking at that too. That looks very Egyptian. That may come out of the Egyptian milieu that Apocalypse is coming from here.
That person is shown on the page before. There's it's shown, and I saw that, I'm like, is that Moon Knight? The one that always annoying Moon Knight? What's their name? I forgot the name of the Khonshu. I'm like, is that guy? But the thing is, Apocalypse is also Egyptian, right?
That's right.
So I'm like, that's how they're teaming up. That's what I thought initially.
Well, while we're on these pages, I want to put out a call to the crazy people of the internet to translate those hieroglyphs on the Egyptian temple wall behind Apocalypse and see what clues that can shed on what we're seeing here.
Yeah, you crack the Hickman code. I'm sure you can translate some higher. And knowing Hickman and Lara's, it probably does spell something.
I'll bet it does.
Yeah.
And then also, so the thing is, the Apocalypse that the Nimrod that he's killing. Mm-hmm. Is that the one from Powers of 10? I'm asking.
That sure looks like him in design. That looks like our pot-bellied sassy Nimrod that we saw in Powers of 10.
Since I saw that panel, my life changed. I've been using that panel a lot.
That brings me, I think, to the most fascinating part of timeline number 9. We don't know where it ends, and we don't know how Moira dies. And
Right.
and it's possible that it extends all the way to the X to the power of 2 setting of the order of magnitude of 100 years, and that they're now past the sentinel barrier that Moira is typically concerned with trying to get past. And now she's witnessing a future mutant war that she's never had to anticipate before.
Well, the narration says war without end, and we don't know how literally to take this.
But it also, no, please go. I have the second part to that, but we should stick on the first one if people have things to say.
No, I was just going to say Apocalypse War began. Is that also established war that have happened? Like, no?
I mean, there was a story called that, but it basically is just used as a name for any time Apocalypse.
Correct.
Okay.
I mean, it's kind of a non-crossover thing.
Right.
Ran, and I was like, I read through it, but I don't remember anything about it actually.
Okay.
And it's very recent.
So,
okay.
Something interesting here, and what I want to end Life 9 on is, let's say Moira has the opportunity to live forever in this life. Let's say the Sentinel, the Endless War, means a lot of mutants live.
Yeah.
What is the real goal for Moira? Like, is her goal to live forever? Is her goal that mutants don't get wiped out? Because basically, like, what creates success for her? And what is she going to want to duplicate in Life 10? Because that makes her want to break all the rules. Like, what?
I was thinking of this too, and it's a real question, because your first instinct would be to say, well, she wants to stop this cycle of violence. She wants peace. But the two options that she's chosen right before Life 10 are the opposite of that. She's actively pursuing war and violence. So I don't know, maybe she's hoping that somebody will come out on top, and then there will be peace. Maybe that's her operative theory here. She's so tied into this theory of evolutionary biology that she assumes somebody is going to win out in this evolutionary arms race, and then we're not going to have this constant string of conflicts.
Freya?
I was thinking, like, did Apocalypse really radicalized her? Like, she gotten too much, she was around Apocalypse too much that her whole outlook changed.
Tyler?
I think one thing is that, like, I don't know if she's the consort or she's the horseman, because in the silhouette there is like 4 silhouettes, and I think she's one of them. So she could be both, or she could be one and then she became the other. And going back to the point where Freya mentioned earlier about those dash lines in the chart, this one has a dash line, so maybe she was Moira until that point, and then she doesn't know anything else, and she doesn't know how her ninth life ends. She just get reborn.
Holy crap!
Well, if we are looking at what is the consciousness of Moira, maybe at some point the consciousness of Moira changes so fundamentally, or transfers in some fundamental way, such that even if there is a Moira living on, it's not the Moira who's going to show up in Life 10. We don't know, because it doesn't tell us, and the next 2 panels we're going to get before Life 10 are simply black panels that say, and then ellipsis, and then ellipsis.
Yeah.
So the thing, one question though, what was my question? Apart, like, horsemen or horsewomen, when they become that, do they become like someone else? Like, do they? Like,
depends on how you interpret it. So they sometimes seem to think so. Other people sometimes argue against it. It's a little bit uncertain.
And so are these the horsemen that showed up in Uncanny X-Force? Like, are those also Apocalypse's horsemen?
He's basically always trying to put together his version of the 4 biblical horsemen, and if one of them dies, he just makes another one. Mm-hmm. And Death is usually team captain, and when Death's not around to be team captain, it's war, and then Pestilence and Famine just kind of do their thing. Would you say that's accurate, gentlemen?
Mm-hmm.
I think so. That started in X Factor.
Yeah.
When, how Angel became Archangel, and that was Death. He was Death, so...
Yeah, so that's what I'm saying, because to Tyler's point, like, it's no longer Moira, so that's become, like, that's why I was asking, like, if you become horse person, you're no longer yourself. So
that is such an interesting concept about the dotted lines, because it's like, is it that the timeline's continuing because her body hasn't ceased function, but psychically she's checked out enough that she's
She has no memory.
And this is a concept that I think may be very significant because we've seen lots of different references in previous issues of these series to consciousness being transferred and absorbed and synthesized. So if one thing that Moira is after, or if the only thing that Moira is after is some level of immortality beyond this cycle, then managing to transfer her consciousness even as her body dies may be a way out of the cycle.
And this is also the point that I mean, this is actually towards the very end, but that's when I was beginning to also question, what is her target? Like, does she remember that anymore? Because it seems like it was at the very beginning that it was about stop the Sentinel at all cost, but looks like that kind of shifted somewhere and in Life 7 onwards. Like,
I think that ultimately, when she talks about in this final life that we're going to get to, Life 10, breaking all the rules, I think that the rule she's going to break is the evolutionary arms race. I think that she is going in some way that we don't quite know yet. I think that she thinks she has discovered a way to break out of this cycle of species competing with one another for dominance. I don't think we have the information yet to know what her game plan is or what this elaborate strategy is going to be, but I think that's what she's after at the end.
So let's go to Life 10, because I want to also remember Tyler, because Tyler pointed out something yesterday. We were doing the test that we need to discuss over here, but let's start with Life 10.
Well, I think let's use that last thing that Zach said to bring us into life number 10. So Moira has done many different things. She, in her last life, killed Xavier as early as possible to see what goes on without him, and lasted the longest that she's lasted so far, but with the knowledge that Destiny told her she would get 10. So maybe 11. So here we are, and her first thought, very determined fetus, is... I think it might actually be worth reading it off of there because it's quite specific. She says,
Sorry.
all the lives lost after the end of all the wars, armed with the knowledge that all the old ways and all the old ways of thinking would never be enough to save her people, she decided to try something truly revolutionary. And in Moira's 10th life, she decided she and Charles Xavier would break all the rules. That is, Freya, what did you think when you got there? Did that give you those tingles you got when you first read House of X #1?
Yeah, it did. It gave me a lot of tingles. And, and I was like, holy shit got real. Because there's a very determined, like as you said, a very determined fetus out there, which gonna turn into a very determined baby. Babies are scary. But the thing is, I mean, to me, I think that's where I want to bring, is this Life 10 or Life 11? Because to Tyler, you go your theory. You tell us your theory.
Well, I mean, when I first look at that page with the two black panels, I was like, why is there two different panels exactly the same and then? Is there a jump here?
Maybe. I mean, the narration does specifically say 10th life, so that on that level, it's not ambiguous.
Correct.
We don't know quite what this 10th life means. It seems from the timeline that it's the 616 universe.
Yeah.
It seems from the timeline that it's at least the universe that we're seeing in House of X, maybe Powers of 10. We don't quite know for sure.
Yeah.
But if this is the 616 universe, what on earth is this game plan? What kind of elaborate scheme has she concocted that would cause events to proceed in the absolutely mashugana way that they have throughout X-Men history?
I know.
So the reason I say that this is probably at 11th life or something, because I was kind of looking at it more of a cinematic point of view, because I was saying that, first of all, who's telling the story? Because this is not first person. This is a second, narration kind of thing. So the thing is, it goes and in 10th life, she decided she and Charles Xavier would break all the rules. Cut to that whole scene from Powers of 10, but she said, and I wondered. It sounded like it was a continuation. So House of X and 10th life happened. and then this is happening in 11th life.
This is a good observation, because there is technically an ambiguity here, and we have heard commentators on the internet, people. I mean, this is something that's been sort of going around in the internet commentary. Talk about the Kuleshov effect, which is this film theory that we associate things in terms of cause and effect just because they are next to each other, either in a movie or in a book.
Yeah.
We assume that because these scenes are placed next to each other, that what we're seeing in this conversation between Moira and Xavier is happening in Life 10. We are not told that it's happening in Life 10. That's an assumption that we are making. And you're right to say that there actually is ambiguity there.
Right, and that's what, like, by the way, everyone should watch Arrival, the movie, because that's the whole point, piece of this very particular thing that I'm talking about, having seen side by side, how it changes you, changes your perception of things. But yeah, I mean, that's why I'm thinking that, and this is also me, I'm like, well, Hickman is often a little bit ahead of everyone in terms of ahead of the readers. So that's why I'm saying that is this another trick to say that, oh, this is actually Life 11, but it's actually probably Life 10, or that's why
I want to be careful of becoming like a Life 11 truther here for two reasons, maybe three. So one is that in terms of the construction of that page, the baby that's presumably the Life 10 baby, because the narration goes to Life 10, gets 2 panels, and there are 2 black panels. So as much as it seems like the implication is that it's like panel for 9, panel for 10, panel for 11, the actual construction, parallelism of the page is that half of the page is one life, and half of the page is the other. So I do want to be cautious about that. But then the other thing is, Hickman uses sleight of hand, and he lies as a person on Twitter, but he very rarely lies in the books. And I just have this strong gut feeling that this is Hickman doing something that's not the J.J. Abrams mystery box, and he's actually giving us as much information as he possibly can to let us figure it out. One of my frustrations, which Freya will remember fondly from a year ago with his Avengers and New Avengers, is to a point you just couldn't figure it out. Like when all this stuff happens with the Builders and the Black Swans and Doctor Strange, whatever, you're like, okay, this is fascinating, but I had no chance of figuring this out unless I was just throwing darts at a wall for the whole 3 years of this run. Whereas I feel like here, even though there is definitely some sleight of hand going on with what's going on with the bench, I just don't feel like he's trying to, I don't think we're going to have to parse that closely to figure out what the missing piece of information is. I don't know. I think Life 11 does come into it. And I think, and if we look at the timeline is explicit that Hawk's House of X is happening in Life 10. So I think the question is kind of like, do we think all 12 of these issues might actually end yet again? And we're going to find out that 616 has been Life 11 all along. And the story of House of X and Powers of 10 is just the story of how Moira broke the rules to fix things.
I would say that would be very disappointing.
Yeah,
I don't think that that's what Hickman's doing, because I think that Hickman is a good enough writer to recognize that if that were his twist at the end, that's a bad twist. That makes everybody feel like they've just wasted a pretty good chunk of their reading life, reading a story that ultimately isn't the story that we're going to be told.
It's a lost decade.
No, but the thing is, no, what I was saying, that if it is indeed Life 11 is 616, Moira took a huge step back as a person, because she just 616 Moira, all this time we know, who is she? What is this is what I'm saying. In the course of events that she allows to happen, or perhaps instigates happening based on this conversation with Xavier, what is she up to? Why is this her plan? What kind of plan is this?
And let's not lose sight of, and this is the thing that I cannot let go of, and I don't want to get too deep, but this is the only timeline that has her having Proteus that we can see. Of course, we don't see too deeply into timeline number 6. And Proteus is a reality warping Omega level mutant. Is it a coincidence that the life where she says she's going to break the rules is the only life where she's the mother of an Omega level mutant? Especially when she and Apocalypse just enslaved Mr. Sinister. They used the word enslaved on
I'm not saying that you're wrong. You may be right. But if we were to actually look at that, if we were to take a step back and look at that as a plan that she's concocting for her last life, that's a terrible plan. Having gone through all of this, being a world expert geneticist, she's not going to create a reality warping mutant by the right combination of DNA factors. No. She's going to marry a man who's going to be a terrible marital match for her, in the hopes that maybe the two of them will conceive exactly the right child who will happen to have reality warping powers that sometime in the distant future, after she calls in the X-Men to try and kill this same son, may have some unknown role to play in whatever her ultimate game plan is.
Here's the thing. If Proteus has only shown up on this timeline, then she doesn't know what will happen with Proteus. Like, I'm not saying
But she doesn't
know
know that Proteus is going to be born either. That's a roll of the dice for the last life she's got to live.
There's clearly something significant about it. Like, although then the flip side of the same kind of theory of it being significant is like Malcolm, what is his name in Jurassic Park? Life finds a way. like she thought she had this great plan, and here's Proteus to be like, well, sometimes you don't control all the variables, Moira.
So why are we saying that Proteus is like a biological, not like, you know, something she concocted, like, you know, she made in the lab and then was
I'm not saying she made him or engineered him or even that it was with intent. I'm just saying there's something about the rule breaking she's doing intentionally or not, that means that Proteus only turns up in this lifetime. It's just too big a part of her history or on-panel history for Hickman to sum it up here, and not all he had to do was say that she still had Proteus when she married Xavier, or she had Proteus in some, like, all he had to do is put it on one other timeline. Yes, it could have happened in 6, but I just think that you can't avoid this. I'm really hung up with this. Tyler, talk me up or talk me down. You know these stories. Is it important that Proteus only appears in timeline 10?
I kind of think that it might be an accident, because this is the only timeline she married that guy.
Yeah.
That guy.
Yeah. I can't remember his name.
Joe McTaggart.
Yeah, Joseph McTaggart. So this is the only time she's a McTaggart. Previously, she's just Moira. She's not a McTaggart.
Yes, never again to be known as Moira McTaggart.
My sense, just from like a satisfying literary standpoint here, is, again, that's kind of a disappointing solution to this. If ultimately what her plan comes down to is, I'm going to have kind of a deus ex machina of a kid, I don't think that's a satisfying way to construct a story.
I don't think so either. I just think so. I think this is a corner that any other writer might have written themselves into, but Hickman wrote himself into it quite deliberately. I mean, what if her version of breaking the rules is that Xavier's going to mind wipe her? What if she thinks she's the variable that has to be taken out, and so she just goes along her normal life and shit happens? Like, we don't know.
If we're going to focus on her being the variable that gets taken out, what about the fact that she fakes herself being taken out right around there at year 49, when she fakes death with something called a Shi'ar Golem, a brand new fact to which we have just been introduced in this timeline.
It's time, everybody, for Zach's religious biblical history cornucopia.
This is not going to be as exciting as you'd like it to be, because we know so little about this notion of the Shi'ar Golem, or what on earth it is, that I don't know how it's supposed to relate. So I can give a brief background about what the notion of a golem is in traditional Jewish lore, but we have no idea what that actually means for this story. So a golem is technically a phrase that comes originally from the Bible. It shows up once in the book of Psalms. And in that immediate context, it's used to mean something akin to a partially made person during God's process of creation. Technically, like literally, it means a light form, which is kind of weird. But it's in interpreted Hebrew, it generally means a figure of a human being having been constructed out of clay that is not yet finished. Where it gets more interesting is in the post-biblical period, in Talmudic stories and in Jewish folk stories, when you have a whole tradition of stories about golems that are created by the Jewish people at various times during their history for various purposes. Constructed out of clay, brought to life by inscribing on their forehead a Hebrew word, which kind of, it varies from story to story, but it's usually the word emet, which means truth. And then the life is taken away from the golem by removing one letter from the word emet so that it means met, which is dead. So you change it from truth to dead. And that's how you take away life from the golem once it's been given to it. The most famous story of the golem is the Golem of Prague, which, if you've ever read the wonderful novel, The Amazing Adventures of Cavalier and Clay by Michael Chabon, which is a great novel about the comic book industry and everybody should read it, you will have encountered that story because that factors into it. But that is a story about a golem that was created by the Jews of Prague to protect them during a time of crisis, a time of pogrom. They brought this thing to life as their protector. It worked, but the golem eventually lost control. It became too human, it became violent, it became dangerous, and they eventually had to take life away from it because they had realized they had overstepped their boundaries. They had usurped the role of God by giving sustained life to this creature, and it had to be taken back. They had gone too far. There's a lot to unpack there. We don't know how it's going to relate here. We have certainly seen notions of Xavier and maybe others in the story assuming the role of God in a way that they should not. We have seen people creating lives in a way that perhaps they should not. So we will see what Shi'ar Golem means if we ever discover that. But that's your general background for the notion of the golem.
So what about the future girl with the symbol on her face?
From Powers of 10, number 1?
Yeah, because you said a golem has a symbol on the forehead.
Is that Moira's Shi'ar Golem in the future, having been brought to life with an inscribed symbol? Well, I do not know.
Really connects interestingly to the idea of what counts as Moira being alive, her consciousness or her body, and what counts as consciousness or body. We're so far along in this discussion. I do think there's a couple of things that I just want to point out and see if anybody wants to speak to lightning round style, okay? Lightning round style. The reason Moira has to fake her death, or dies, as we think in the comic books, is that she's the one human who contracts the legacy virus, and it's Mystique's fault. What do we think about that? Is Mystique actually trying to kill Moira now with all these revelations? Or is Mystique actually acting as an accomplice to Moira, given all of these revelations?
So is there, to that, I want to mention, does anyone else remember this information, right? That's what we established before, that no one else remembers that they have, that Moira is, every time she reset, everyone's life also reset, correct?
Yeah, only Destiny has a sense by seeing the negative space around her that something is amiss.
Yeah, in that case, I have nothing. Someone else.
Anybody else? Mystique killing her or aiding her?
It's a really, really good question. And we have no knowledge at this point or from any prior X-Men stories to know quite what was up there. Mystique, on the surface level, Moira died trying to stop Mystique from releasing a version of the legacy virus that was going to only affect humans. But in story after story after that, we got these sort of veiled, unclear hints from Mystique that actually wasn't all there was to it. She had some other plan that we didn't know about, and it probably connected to Destiny, and we never found out what that plan was. So Hickman has seized on a nice little bit of unresolved Claremont-era continuity that it looks like we may actually get cleared up here.
Yeah.
And also, the word Krakoa is never mentioned in her entire life. Was there? It was never mentioned. So where is House of X issue 1 stuff is happening?
It's happening in where it says in the timeline in year.
No, but the thing is, just before that, Magneto and Xavier has a schism. What does schism mean? What does that mean?
So that's the next thing I want to lightning round. But before we get to the schism, can we get? And I want to start with Tyler here. What do you think it means to bring Magneto into the fold? Xavier, it seems all 4 of us are taking as read that Xavier knows everything because Moira let him read her mind.
Yeah.
What does bringing Magneto into the fold look like, Tyler?
I just think that it is how it happens. So he's just trying to bring someone in so that, Xavier doesn't want to do the hard stuff.
Oh.
So we bring Magneto in as the necessary evil to do the stuff that Xavier doesn't want to do, but have to do because of the knowledge that Moira has gained.
And to that, like, he does do that in Mystique's solo run. He does hire Mystique to do dirty work. Like, he doesn't like doing it. He's evil like that. There's something about, like, I wanted to make a joke, but Zach's looking at me funny, so I didn't want to.
I think I was examining my own face in the camera. I think part of the question of this Magneto thing is whether the recruitment is something that we saw in previous issues, if this is a landmark to situate us in terms of the X-Men that we know, or if this is a new piece of information that we're learning, that Magneto somewhere off camera has been recruited into this scheme that Moira and Xavier have concocted.
Because I think there's like a question of like how complicit Magneto gets made. Like Xavier is such a two-faced, backstabbing, whatever you want to call him, that this almost contextualizes some of that. But then it's like, oh my gosh, do I have to think about Magneto as being contextualized that way? And from when? Was when he came on as a headmaster earlier. And then to get to the schism, it seems like opinion is starting to coalesce around the idea that the schism is probably in X-Men 1991, 1-3, when Magneto kind of breaks bad again, because he is pissed at Moira in that story.
Sure, and it's one of the very few times that we've got the three of them like in a story together being actively angry at one another.
Right, and to your point, like, let's look at where these characters have been on page together, because Hickman is trying to use our history in our favor here. Yeah. Tyler, any thoughts on that?
I mean, or could it be simply just because, I mean, the part about year 43, could it simply be the point where they hired him as the headmaster?
Yeah, so, I mean, it could. It really, really could.
It could be just like a pointer there. Yeah, and instead of him recruiting into the scheme, the entire scheme of...
I mean, Peter, you've sort of seized on the fact that the tracking of Proteus's age doesn't quite seem to add up then, because it seems like he's older than 12 years old maybe when he goes crazy, but I don't know.
Yeah, I think they've
it can work.
Yeah. So if Free can excuse me for one moment, I want to ask one more lightning round type of question that I don't think has any foreknowledge of, and then we'll come to her to wrap us up. Moira was possessed for a significant amount of time, from around Uncanny X-Men 150 or 250 to 280 by the Shadow King. Does this mean that the Shadow King knows Moira's plan?
The Shadow King, if I could jump in here, must be vitally important here, because we've now talked about 2 of the 3 times that the Moira Mystique Destiny triangle comes into play in X-Men history. This is the 2nd time, and this is the time when Destiny dies. Yes. This moment when Moira is possessed by the Shadow King on Muir Island, so is Charles Xavier's son David. And when
AKA Legion.
And when Moira, when Mystique and Destiny, then serving with Freedom Force, are called in to intervene on a crisis in Muir Island, that is when Destiny is killed by the possessed Legion. This must be a key fact. It must be a key fact. Moira, either by design or by accident, has managed to off her ostensible promised killer Destiny. I mean, this is something that is clearly important in this timeline.
So we're saying that the House of X issue 1 that we saw before this is part of Life 10. Yeah?
Yes. I think the timeline is explicit.
Okay, so if it is, why Magneto's there and where is Moira in issue 1?
Because she went after.
Yeah, where is Moira anywhere since she apparently faked her death?
Yeah.
Oh, that's right. She faked her death, and then at some point, Magneto.
We've never seen her since. She could be anywhere. She could be in Nimrod. She could be the consciousness of Krakoa. Moira could be anywhere.
Okay, and then at some point along the line, Xavier and Magneto got back together. Like, they became friends again.
That's one of those things that's kind of been like elided in this jump to the beginning of this. Jordan White, the editor, said earlier this week, like, you can assume that however much time has elapsed between the last X-Men you read and this story. We're not going to be explicit. Magneto was kind of on the outs with the X-Men, the last we saw, but I maybe we'll get an explanation. Yeah. But it's kind of like, why is Xavier hanging out with Cyclops and Jean? He wasn't that chummy with them the last time we saw.
But this reconciliation happened during whatever gap established the status quo that we see at the beginning of House of X #1.
And I was kind of thinking about X-Men Black Magneto, one shot. How we find. Yeah, where he was just hanging out in the desert, like, in like hanging out in like a bar and stuff, and had this very
there's clearly been some kind of gap, and we don't know yet what happened in that gap.
And then after that, he just kind of upped and left, like, that I don't know whether that's but at some point that happened. So this is the breaking rules kind of thing.
Yeah, but I have something which I cannot really reconcile, but it could be just a matter of like how he's playing with the powers thing. But isn't the year one is when Xavier read Moira's mind, and then year 10 was when he has the helmet. It seems like 50 years have passed in that timeline.
So the information we've received is we're supposed to not take those years totally literally, that they're literally orders of magnitude.
Correct.
So like if it's year 23, 23 is closer in orders of magnitude to 10 than it is to 100.
I mean, that's what I figured.
As in all things edited by Jordan White, I think the less we think about the literal reality of the number of years that pass, probably the better for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Or that's life 11. Or that's life 11. And then, that everything failed. It failed. Like, it kind of comes back to the whole idea is a metaphor for different writers taking on X-Men. And no matter what, it's all going to circle back.
Well, that's the that I think is one more thing that we may just want to leave out there, is that we do not yet know how to reconcile any of this with the pretty dark visions of the future that we've gotten in Powers of 10. That if all of that happens in one coherent timeline in which Moira is supposedly breaking the rules in a way that's going to liberate herself and all of us from this pattern of X-Men stories, it doesn't look like it worked out all that well. And is that something that Hickman is going to resolve over the course of the story? Or because we know that this is the beginning of a longer term run, and because he said that it's going to move in phases, the first of which is the most optimistic, is that going to sort of hang over the Hickman era as a vision that maybe there's a little bit of darkness waiting in the future, even after the X-Men think they've stepped out of this cycle?
I really don't want that. Like, I really, really don't want that. I really don't want them to, like, one more moping session. Oh my God, we have all these powers. We can't take down those fucking Sentinels. Like, I can't take it.
And that's why I assumed that Freya wasn't going to like this issue, because I thought that the net of seeing what Moira's been going through, it kind of reduces the optimism levels that we saw in House of X1, and I kind of saw Freya being like, you told me this was going to be an optimistic, happy story. Like,
that's the thing. I can't make that decision because I don't feel like there isn't, like, I don't know enough to see where it's going to go. Like, that's where, the issue by issue reading comes into play. I just don't know. To me, everything that I because the way it's written as a more of an informational, like it's like someone is telling you how the story progressed. That's exactly how I took it. These are all information. These are, to me, this is all the things that happen. Now I need to know how it unfolds before I can make a judgment. So that's why I can't have a reaction to this. So final thoughts, final remarks.
What happened to Life 6?
What indeed happened to Life 6?
I was going to have like a one.
I thought we talked about Life 6.
I guess we must have just skipped that one. That's strange. I wonder what would have made us do that.
No, it seems like it must have been important if she went to be an assassin afterwards.
Sure, I guess we should have covered it, but oh well.
Oh.
But seriously though, so I was doing this whole bit that we finish all our final remarks. I'm like, God, so we're just in summary. We talked about, but Tyler just went there.
In there.
Yes. Hickman is clearly keeping a very important clue off the table now for strategic purposes. And so whatever guesses we're making now about what this means and where it's heading, we are obviously being very deliberately denied a piece of information that will allow us to make that. Yeah. So we can make whatever surmises we feel prepared to make about what that missing piece of information could be and how it will change things. But he's doing this as a literary device. He's keeping it off the table from us.
Yeah, definitely.
Oh, and that's also like, me being like, just getting information like that and not spending any time on it. It was Tyler who pointed out what happened in Life 6. I'm like, what? There's no Life 6 there. so I mean, any speculation? What do we think? Like anything? Nothing. No one has anything.
Maybe that's the 616 life before Hickman destroyed the universe.
I will tell you this with some certainty. It will bend upward on his chart at the end.
What does that
mean? The chart will be symmetrical, and we have 3 lifelines that bend downward around age 13 with the manifestation of Moira's mutant powers. This one will bend upward.
There are no graphic design there are graphic design mistakes that he quickly corrects on here. There's no like random graphic design, especially working with an expert like I think Tom Mueller is the gentleman's name. That is very deliberate, and I think we could spend a whole nother hour talking about why certain timelines went up around the birth of her mutant powers and why certain timelines went down, and why the negative space there, just like the negative space that is Moira and is the Black Flower.
It's a moral inflection. It's a moral inflection, but anyway.
Yeah, I absolutely think it's a moral inflection.
And also,
could be 616. Could be the life that she decides that she's going to align herself with the robots just for funsies. Could be the life where she's like, screw it, I'm just going to live my life and see what happens now that I know all this information. But no matter what happens, something has to happen to radicalize her further to get her to life number 7.
Or that's the Kuleshov effect happening once again, and we assume that her actions in Life 7 depend on Life 6 just because they come in a row.
Well, here's my bigger question. Is Hickman going to tell us? Like, is Life 6 important enough that we're going to know the information about Life 6?
This is absolutely Chekhov's immortal life. He will tell us.
Is he going to tell us at the end of these 12 issues?
That would be an act of authorial cruelty if he did not tell us that life by the end of this event series.
Yeah.
No, So I have a feeling that it's not going to get answered here. Remember, I was telling you about like he's not going to answer something. He's going to drag this one out in his entire.
Let me say, I'm fine with him leaving the future looming at the end of this series. But if he doesn't tell us what that 6th life is by the end of this series, you are going to see my head burst into flames like Firelord in that silhouetted panel. You will see that.
I think it would be a positive thing. The X-Men have so few secrets and mysteries anymore, and it's not a mystery box where he's deliberately misleading us. What if it just doesn't become too important? I'm not saying that's my bet. We have those 2 other issues that are colored in red here, House of X5 and Powers of or House of 10. Damn it, I messed up our streak. House of 10-5 and Powers of X6, which are colored red. Clearly one of them is going to talk about the Apocalypse life. I think we can put money on. So, the question is the other one's going to talk about Life 6 or not?
And how did she die in the 616? Like, how did she die?
She died of the legacy virus.
She died killed by Mystique while stopping Mystique from releasing her modified form of the legacy virus.
That's more accurate. But she did contract it.
That's what Mystique was doing. Which Mystique claims is not what she was doing.
And let me tell you, you can go reread Dream's End. It's not going to give you a lot of information.
It's not the world's best X-Men event.
Yeah.
No.
So, and I mean, to me, that's what, like, I thought that if she was killed by the Sentinels, that's what Trosks were somewhere involved. That's how 7th life would make any sense. But if it's not, then I don't know what that is. One thing I was going to tell you about, like, after reading this, like, and then having this analysis with you gentlemen as well, there is now 2 unbelievably powerful ladies that is hanging out in Marvel Universe. Like, one is Moira, and the other one is, anyone want to take a guess? Anyone? Take a guess.
Take a guess at who you're going to say?
No, yeah. I just said it, so no one heard it.
No one heard it.
Okay, Gwenpool.
Because they can transcend the 616 universe.
Like, no, 2 of them are unbelievably powerful. Like, they can, like, Gwenpool can, like, change reality. Like, what she done in their last issues, she's superbly, unbelievably powerful. Like, what she can do to the structure of reality of that. And it's like, it's not just a hand waving, just because plot, but because of the power set that she has. And now Moira, all she has to do is kill herself and just reset everything again. Like, it just, I mean, I know that the whole idea, like, of that she has something limitation or not, which is we don't know whether that's true or not. I mean, I to me that's something that I took away. I'm like,
but in the whole in the idea of Marvel multiverse, right? The fact that she died and gets reincarnated does not mean the previous timeline is wiped out. It still exists.
Oh, I know.
We think, assuming that that's the rule that Hickman is playing by here, we don't quite know what rule Hickman thinks he's playing by here. And there's at least an off chance that I would hold out there that because Hickman is the guy who wrote the Secret Wars event, which wiped out the old Marvel multiverse, maybe in his own schema of all this, the rules are different now. That when you create different timelines, it doesn't work the way it used to work. I don't quite know for sure.
So now I have another question for you.
Ewing's Ultimates there, because he addresses some of that. Go on,
Tyler.
Sure.
So I have another question for you.
Mm-hmm.
Who is the master to this Doctor Who?
Oh, I don't watch Doctor Who.
I've never heard of that.
So
the
power sets is not restricted to just one person. So who is the other person or many other persons who gets reincarnated over and over again? Everyone, and what if the other one is working?
Who is Moira's equal and opposite counterpart?
Yep.
Or alternately, and I definitely did put some thought into this, who basically sees across timelines. Like I thought of like Miss America Chavez and how she can jump across dimensions and timelines. Like who are the characters, and are any of them characters Hickman is interested in, that basically can cross? Because oh my gosh, are we in for it if somebody decides to cross back to the Apocalypse one? And like I know he said no alternate universes or whatever, but in terms of knowledge and experience, if somebody else knows the same thing as Moira, that creates a lot of dramatic tension. In my head, I was like,
we have already seen the character of Nimrod, who has hopped between alternate timelines. This is already an equal and opposite factor to Moira, who we know has crossed between these different areas.
I have something to say. Hickman said this is not a alternate universe story. He did not say this is multiple alternate universe story.
It's Hickman parsing the English language as is his way.
Because he specifically said this is not a and
this is two alternate universe stories. It runs in two series at the same time.
I'm very proud of myself that I went through this entire video without mentioning first 15 lives of Harry August.
But
you did.
Now I did. But that's what I'm saying. But that's the whole premise of it. That there is one person that's trying to go this way, the other person trying to go this way, and their conflict is like one of the major thing, because
I love how you've spoiled this entire novel for me now.
That's literally saying that World War II story is like this group of people trying to go assassin Hitler. Like, no, that means nothing, because then you have to know how they're doing it, what is going on.
I know.
Yeah, so the thing is, like, that's the whole moral, like, central premise of that. Like, there's like this two opposite, and to Tyler's point, they have the exact same power set. Like, they are the two, because in that universe, there's multiple people who can reincarnate, but they're the only two who can retain the memory of their past lives.
I guess I almost think that Destiny is her up. I mean, Destiny literally says on panel, "I am now your
right." That they are linked together in every life. It seems like Hickman has set up an equal and opposite thing here, and Destiny is her opposite. But if Moira has faked her death in this life number 10, has Destiny?
Oh, Destiny was totally deliberate. I mean, even reading at the time, Destiny is deliberate in walking knowingly into her death.
Right. So was Destiny walking knowingly into her death, or is she out there somewhere? Is Mystique bargaining to get to her with whatever deal she's made with Xavier that we're seeing play out?
You heard me laugh.
That's right. That's right. You called that one, and I think you were right.
What if the book that they are reading from is the Book of Destiny?
That's something that I had posited before in these conversations. That what if what we are seeing here is in fact the Book of Destiny? Which is another dangling plot thread that we never really got resolved at all.
Never got used as well as it could have. Yeah. Wow.
Book of Destiny is also a thing from Sandman. It's also there.
I guess so. Look, we all know me to be a curmudgeon who hates all comic books and just happens to own them all. I typically am against these kind of retcon plots because then you've got to go through like every panel of every comic and be like, oh, are we going to re-examine what Xavier thought here, what he thought here, what Moira did here, there? But every time I go back to something, at least for Moira, not for Xavier, it actually tracks really well, I'm finding. And B, even if I personally hate this plot development, which I do, and Zach can confirm my cursing and screaming when I found out about it, I've never seen us X-Men fans get this excited. Maybe for Phoenix 5, I'm like trying to think, maybe for Third Summer's Brother. There's not a lot of points that have made us this excited, and it's like, to me, even if I personally don't like it, like I have to begrudgingly love it because it seems like it's really good.
Yeah, I've got to say the level of just like engaged enthusiasm in the entire X-Men fan community here is something that I've never seen. This is what I've got to imagine it was like back in like 91 when they were launching the new X-Men series with Jim Lee. You know, it feels like that.
Tyler?
No, I mean, I definitely enjoy this, and I enjoy discussing this. You know, and I just think it's really interesting. I mean, it made me go back and try and solve the alphabets. Try to come up with a chart that shows like what is A, what is B, and you know, it says, I think the next issue it says, this is what you do.
Yeah, it does.
Which seems like it's going to be the plan that Moira's spilling to Xavier on that park bench.
Yeah, and also I think it's interesting also because it made me like bring out like Powers of 10 first issue, and then compare like panel to panel for that conversation on the bench. I was trying to discern if are they the same timeline, the same life.
Right.
Well, apparently it is. I think.
And to me, that's the thing. Like, is it like it's just a copy paste? So it's not drawn by Laraz because the other one is drawn by someone else, right?
I think it's redrawn.
Yeah, this is Laraz redrawing Silva's panels.
Yeah.
Oh, so it was redrawn. So to me, that's.
I mean, it's really meant to be pretty identical. But it's clearly, and they're two different styles.
There is no difference between the two of them. That's one of the things I wanted to bring up just with art. So my final thought on this is like, as new X-Men reader, like, you know, and I said that before, like, to me, I've seen this story play out before. And then, you know, but having gone through this detailed analysis with you guys, it made me realize, oh, there is something different. Like, it's like the same idea being reused, and so much to unpack. I am so excited to see where this goes, how this is reconciled, and if this is going to be used in MCU to bring, like, you know, to like redefine X-Men as we see it, because this is nothing that like this happened before, right? I don't know. I mean, that's something that I kind of immediately thought about, because Hickman being on X-Men is because they're bringing, like, you know, how now their decisions are run by MCU a lot, and the fact that they're bringing him is because to do that. So I don't know. And we have already seen how Jane Thor got introduced in MCU and stuff. So I don't know how this story can eventually translate.
In terms of trying to get lightning strike twice, I mean, even though a lot of Infinity War and Endgame was based on a whole legacy of plots, the Black Order and many other small details were drawn from Hickman, and it's like, you know, and they deliberately put him on Avengers after the first Avengers movie came out because he had just done such a thing on Fantastic Four, and it's like, I do think there's an element of Marvel trying to get lightning to strike twice here. Luckily, Hickman is a lifelong X-Men fan, and he was like, yes! But I'm sure I hope that they backed up a dump truck full of $100 bills to his door, and to Lars's door, and Silva's door, and Marta Gracia's door. And who's our letterer here? I don't want to leave them out. Because this is, I mean, this issue, talking about any complaints I have, we didn't even talk about the arcs. We've been so in terms of story. The art is perfect.
This was such a huge step up from the last issue of this. Unbelievable. And Laraz's skill with facial expressions in this issue too. I loved every panel he drew for this. I thought it was superb.
I mean, I can say without too much exaggeration, it's one of the best interiors of an X-Men comic book we've seen in a long time.
From the cover all the way on through. Just a gorgeous issue.
Yeah.
I would frame that cover and put it on my wall.
I want to make like a. Does it make a 3-dimensional shape? Like, would it make
Ooh.
what is that shape? A dodecahedron? A decahedron? Does it make a decahedron? I don't know. Or septic?
Somebody fold it and find
Engineer.
out.
No, I might have to print it out and fold it up.
Say that again.
Engineer. I can't point properly. Engineer.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah, that's what you're saying. I don't remember the shape of it, but I know what you're talking about. I would now like to do that. Speaking of Laraz, I mentioned this in the House of X first episode. Like when I met him, he drew something on the back of the cardboard. I want to show that. So this is what it is. And then he drew Quentin Quirk for me.
Ah,
Another Omega.
nice.
Yes, and now I'm really hoping. I asked him to do Moira McTaggart, like Moira, and to see his reaction. Like,
Could you imagine? Has anybody ever asked for a commission of Moira?
Yeah.
Right? If I said, like, oh my God, Moira's my favorite character. Can you please draw her? And then see his
Just watch his
reaction.
face.
Like, oh my God, this is a mind reader.
Yeah, but just look, we are witnessing a generation of X-Men readers who are going to walk away from this saying unironically that Moira McTaggart is their favorite X-Men character.
Right.
So
Well,
thus
one of the
are
crazy
things made.
Is
But
that there's a
you
generation
also
of
notice that
characters
the
who-
cover, right? They play with the fact that Xavier and Magneto is opposite each other, Jean Grey and Emma, and Cyclops and Wolverine.
Yeah.
Yeah, the design choices on that cover about who is next to each other, who is placed laterally, who is opposite, it's so clever.
And I'll say
And-
that right now we're seeing a generation of X-Men fans who don't even know who she is. I mean,
That's
she died
right.
in
That's right.
What, 1999? 2000?
Yeah,
And
99,
I've
2000.
literally been talking to people that I talk who know the X-Men as well as you folks here, who are like, okay, but I've actually never read a comic with more in it other than classic Claremont. Because they haven't read like Excalibur or whatever. And I'm like, that is wild to me. Because to me, she's like a living character
Yeah.
who was around when I was reading comics. So it's just talking about that generational divide that these new people, Freya, who's now coming into the X-Men fold here, to her, Moira's always going to be this kick-ass character.
And
She's
and,
never
and,
gonna have
and
read
not
Moira
only that,
not
her
being
her
kick-ass.
period when she was dead was actually when I was not reading comic books. So for me, like my default state of mind is, well, of course Moira's alive. I've only recently caught up on any comics where she's not alive.
Yeah,
Mhm.
just okay. But I think it's time for
Yep.
Freya to
Right.
Having wasted so much of the world's time now nattering about X-Men between the four of us.
Hey, listen, it's never a waste when it's like, I spend time with you guys and, and all this analysis and stuff, because so many things just went right over my head. And now I'm looking, I'm like, oh my God, you guys. So once again, thank you everyone for tuning in and watching our very, very, very detailed. Sorry that it went this long, but to be honest, there
I'm
was
not
just
sorry.
no. I mean,
I think the world will agree that it was worth it.
it was
Yeah.
Yeah.
worth it. It was worth it, and the thing is, like, it had to be. This issue was just that interesting, and we needed to talk about. So part 1 of 2, you can find the link below, and I will probably try to find a way how to link it, at the end of it. And please join us next week where we talk about Powers of 10, issue number 2, right? That's where we're at.
Yep.
And it's like,
Nailed it.
yeah, 2 back-to-back issue of Powers of 10. So I don't know what that means. So it's going to be very exciting. So tune in for that. And, we will have some extra additional shows in between of that. So subscribe, leave us your comment. What did you think about this run? And this issue, how your HiX-Men is shaping out, to join us for all the social media thing. You can find Peter at Crushing Crisis, where all your collected edition needs all in one location. And Tyler and Zach, thank you so, you can find them over here. But thank you
Thanks.
so much. Yeah, thank you
No
so
longer
much.
a baby.
Be here.
Tyler.
Yeah, Tyler, thank you for joining us. And,
Yep.
Tyler will be back in another episode with us. We don't know. We'll see.
Yeah.
So thank you once again. And
Thanks for having me.
yeah, and we'll see you next week on
Yeah.
New Era of X-Men.